A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. From the Tao Te Ching, it reminds us that big achievements are built on small and consistent resolutions. Day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year, we keep going, no matter what. Hey there, Truth Seeker. Welcome to the Star Kittens community where we discuss 13 sign astrology. Are you in alignment with your divine design? Do you want to master the metaphysical reality? Open the doors of perception. Each planetary body is an archetype, a template, if you will, that helps us interpret human behavior and the world around us. The more awake and aware we are, the more synchronicity will show up in your life. Our focus today is the Libra new moon. We will spotlight and interpret the favorable trine to Saturn and the challenging square to Vulcanus-Mars, forming a tense opposition with Pluto. To help us reach more souls with this important message, please like, share, and subscribe. There's a lot going on, so let's jump in. Libra time. Kia ora, David. What an exciting time.
It is an exciting time, and thanks for your little gift. This is a wand that was left for me. So I'm sure we're going to have a good blog today.
Yes, exactly. So whilst we are recording this, it is still Virgo time, and this new moon is occurring with the sun and moon being on 1 degree Libra, and we like Libra season. My south node is in Libra, your south node is in Libra, and your sun is in Libra. So what are we going to expect during this new moon cycle?
Yeah. Best time of the year, a little bit of bias there. Obviously, the month of my birthday as a Libra, double Libra, as you've said, with a Libra South Node and Libra Sun. But enough about me. Libra symbolizes the balance. And at a new moon here, the balance we're talking about is between our head and our heart, what we call head and heart coherence. The left brain, right brain harmonization, if you like, and the pursuit of perspective. Libra is an air sign, and which means it's time to think and communicate. The tarot card for Libra is justice, which signifies equilibrium, cause, and effect. Libra is traditionally associated with contracts and commitments in the context of relationships. So we like to define Libra in that case as involving not just personal relationships, but also professional relationships where you might be in a business partnership or a tight small business with one or two others. That to us also is part of the Libra energy. Because many of those partnerships, in fact, can be like marriages or serious committed relationships. So the relationships here are personal and professional. Where Aries independence, Aries being the other side of Libra, Libra is where that independence gives way to interdependence. Libra is the 7th sign in the zodiac, and therefore that number to us represents depth, contemplation, and wisdom. It's a very sacred number, 7. Saturn's trine, which you mentioned before, at this new moon enhances and amplifies Libra energies. When we think about that tarot card, and we'll put an image on the screen, holding the sword of justice, it signals to us that actions have consequences, and that very much is part of the Saturn lexicon. Saturn Libra, therefore, is also about the implied and explicit contracts that exist within these personal and professional relationships. By implied, we mean that which is unspoken, and explicit, that which is clearly expected of us or written down within the relationship context. So therefore, Saturn Libra being the new moon and Saturn being in a trine, asks us to consider, are these relationships in the way that they are structured serving our highest good? Are we conscious, engaged and present to our interactions within these serious relationships? And if there's a quarrel, dispute, or some friction at this particular time in this lunar cycle of 28 days, it's a perfect time for resolution. The trine being favorable, perfect time for resolution, so long as that resolution or the remediation or the negotiation about that quarrel within these 7th house Libra relationships is fair and equitable is the key. And also, you mentioned before about that Vulcanus-Mars piece. Well, that brings forward any ideas of dysfunction that may exist within these relationships. And that gives us a hint that the root cause of that dysfunction may be in the mother-son relationship or within the family. It's where the root of it could be found. And we'll talk a little bit more about that Vulcanus-Mars square and the impact that it has on this new moon in the context of relationships. Finally, the opposition to Pluto is very simple, that if there are conflicts and dysfunction within our relationships, that Pluto provides us with a template or a pathway. We like to call it the Plutonic pathway, that helps us to transmute, transcend and transform those difficulties.
Yes. And we've spoken about Vulcanus in the past, so if this is a new story for you, make sure that you check out our previous videos where we talk about Vulcanus. But as you were talking about the interdependency, a story that happened to me several years ago came to mind. I was doing a yoga teacher training in an ashram in India, and I was so self-sufficient and I was able to do everything, and I was boasting on one day, and it's like, oh, I'm so independent, look at me. And the next day, as we were coming down, it's still pitch black because you start the day very early, I fell down some steps and I had a suspected fracture in my elbow, which meant that I was going to be in a cast from my wrist all the way up to my shoulder, and I became very dependent on everyone around me. And so I really learned that interdependent state of being. We rely on each other for so many things. And sure, some things it's, you have to go through your own personal growth and you have to take the steps to become a better person in this lifetime, but you're not alone. And there's other people always willing to listen and give advice if you're open to that. Just wanted to share that story. So to start off, thank you for that summary. So how are you seeing this Libra energy with this new moon coming in?
Well, as a Libra, I like to think that this is quite straightforward. It is my sign. As an air sign, the domain, as I mentioned before, is communication and thought. Context is committed personal and professional relationships that involve contracts, particularly. And the contract piece is just about, that's the difference. That signifies that that particular personal or professional relationship is serious to you. It's what we would call a primary relationship. So that's the domain, the background, if you like, the stage for Libra. But really, this is an amicable, benevolent energy under Venus's guardianship, provided we are in open communication with and present to our partner, or if it's a business context, partners. So enjoy the energetic, the easygoing ebb and flow is ours to enjoy. Be present, enjoy each other's company, reflect, contemplate on your journey together. However, if engaged in tense negotiations, and we were talking about this over dinner, that we've got some, there are always people involved in dissolutions of partnerships and relationships. So this is the other side of it. I've just mentioned about enjoying the benevolent flow, but if engaged in tense negotiations, quarrels, disputes, dissolutions, breakups, there's a reminder here to seek equanimity, to be fair in all of your dealings with the other parties, to be reasonable and considerate, and that will serve you well at this time. The trine to Saturn, trines are beneficial energies, but trine to Saturn, the Lord of karma, reminds us that everything we think or say or do multiplies and comes right back to you. Saturn here is also about, and I touched on this in the introduction, the structure of our relationships. What responsibilities do you have or are you avoiding? And what role do you play within the relationship? Is it submissive? Is it dominant, or something in between? What is the division of duties? Who does what and why? Saturn says it's time to work on your relationships. It's time to think about our conduct and the consequences of our actions within those relationships. And conversely, it's also within this 28-day lunar cycle a fantastic time to enter into a contract, a business or personal commitment, to draw up the paperwork between now and the end of the month, the end of November, that is. Or enter couples counselling. That also is signified now as a beneficial thing to do.
And that's what I love about what we offer to those who come across our paths, right? It's a good time for this, that, and the other. So this time it's are you being honest within your relationship? And that's, for me, that what also comes up is, are you honest with yourself? And if you're not being honest, if you can't be your true self whilst being in this committed relationship, whether it's a romantic one or a work one, then perhaps it is time to look at changing that situation. Not always easy to take those steps, but there are many others that have done it before you. So did you want to share a little bit more information of how this new moon trine with Saturn, how that Saturn has such a bad rep for me coming into astrology. It's like, oh, the Saturn return and it will come back to bite you in the bum kind of thing. But we've spoken about the really beneficial side. It's kind of pushing you along, keeping you in, keeping you going. I did my master's whilst I was going through my Saturn return, and I feel that Saturn really helped me to stay focused during that 2-year period. So what other information would you like to share about the new moon trine to Saturn?
Yeah, and you make a good point about Saturn, and it is, as an archetype, as people tend to focus on the more frustrating aspects of Saturn, and that is that because he is a taskmaster, or the archetype of learning, in the school of hard knocks and learning over long periods of time, sometimes he or it as an archetype gets a bad rap, and I guess that's what you're saying. But here, it's a beneficial energy, and I've mentioned about the trine. But the Saturn archetype, excuse me, is the archetype of mastery, and that mastery is reflected in the fact that Saturn takes about 28 to 30 years, effectively 3 decades, to move around the whole constellation, or to, as you mentioned, to go from where he started at the point of birth back to there takes about 28 to 30 years. So most of us have 3 Saturn returns. And Saturn returns are almost like they're a moment in our lives, for about 18 months or so to 2 years of when he arrives in the in the place of your birth chart. He's done that first full cycle. It's a time of reflection and contemplation. So Saturn inherently holds that holding us to account type of energy. But that archetype of mastery reflected in 3 periods of 10 years suggests that the energy of Saturn moves very slowly, but it's also very enduring as well. This is the energy of when the student becomes the teacher. We develop wisdom and we develop experience and we develop confidence in our physical and mental abilities. Saturn, of course, as an earth sign, is very much related to action and the way we think as well. Saturn traits of discipline, fortitude, resilience, and hard work. And when we think of the spirit animal for Saturn, which is a goat, there's lots of images that come up, but one word or a couple of words that I like is rugged individualism. When in a trine with Libra, which is the case here, the eye of Aries becomes, and we mentioned that before, that the opposite of Libra is Aries. So the eye of Aries, which is a very independent, self-assertive sign, in Libra, I becomes we of partnership. And in that process, to be effective in our relationships, we need to subordinate aspects of our individuality and collaborate with another or others in the case of a business partnership. So the context of that committed relationships involving contracts and obligations, the message is that Saturn's message, that rewards come eventually from the relationship. We all have different motivations for going into them, but the key here, Saturn's message is be patient. I know that my mum and dad, for example, classic representational, they reflected this. They were married for 25 years and their relationship got better and better, like over time. And I learned a lot from that, from being a child in that family. So be patient. Time is your friend in relationships. Rome wasn't built in a day, was, I guess, what comes to mind. But I mentioned earlier also about Saturn, the structure of relationships. The message of Saturn and Libra is, what is the structure? And what do I mean by that? Within any relationship, that's serious relationship, there are implied and explicit duties and obligations. There are things that we are expected to do that we don't need to actually lay out on a piece of paper, if you like. We just go and do it. But there are also things that we're explicitly expected to do, and that could be within the business relationship or even in the home. So the structure of those relationships is on the table right now. And what we've been asked is, what is explicitly expected of you in your relationship? What is required of you? And what is implied and unspoken? Is it time for a role reversal, a contract variation, or a change in terms? Also, a warning with Saturn is that dirty deeds done dirt cheap, and those that know about the lyrics of certain song, you will recognize that. The backroom deals will be exposed. Sting in the tail could come through. A pay the piper type experience. This is the Saturn influence on the Libra relationships. We could have a mea culpa, a road to Damascus, an awakening experience within the relationship where you think, again, going back to the structure and the roles and responsibilities and how we're acting within that relationship, we may have some realizations and revelations and think, hey, I could do that differently. That's all part of the Saturn energy here as well. So in a sense, the Saturn trine could be a gentle time of reckoning as opposed to a right up in your face, a kind of subtle hints. But also just a warning, as I mentioned before, that misdeeds need to be confronted and benevolently, and that resolution is at hand. You see, within relationships, we can sometimes get away with things, and whether it's personal or romantic or professional, as you mentioned as well. And if that's been going on and it's been eating away at you, Saturn's just gently nudging at this particular point in time to bring it out, have a mea culpa, have an honest and open conversation, and get it resolved. And the energies are beneficial to just that right now.
Thank you. So we speak about beautiful, beneficial trines, and then we also have this square going the opposite way, the other side. As I've mentioned before, we've spoken about Vulcanus several times, and again at dinner time we were talking how clear Vulcanus is about this mother-son relationship. It is such a good archetype, good in quotation marks, archetype to explain what that fractured relationship can be like. So not only is Vulcanus making a square with this new moon, but it's also close to Mars. So how are we going to deal with all this?
Yeah, if the other parts of the Libra new moon are very beneficial and favorable, this one certainly is a little tricky. But I think the key here is, as I mentioned or ended up at the last part of the conversation, which I was talking about, within relationships, there may be some dysfunction, there may be some issues, there may be some conflict, there may be some things that are emerging that need to be resolved. And I think that this square here with Vulcanus and Mars together in Cancer, the square to the new moon, actually provides a little bit of a hint as to what might be at the bottom of some of that dysfunction. So I will go into that a little bit further. We may experience dysfunction within our relationships, and the Vulcan-Mars square provides us with some clues. I won't go into the whole Vulcan myth. We've done a whole video on that, so we'll link that later on. But Cancer, to start with, is a water sign, so therefore that alignment between Vulcanus-Mars in Cancer is about our emotional intelligence. It's about our psychic attunement, and it's also about soul memories that may be bleeding into our awareness. The Vulcanus and Mars are stirring deep unconscious pain and patterns that are linked to our memories or to past or parallel lives, if you believe in that, multiple quantum realities. When linked to Libra, this pairing of planetary energies represents where we may be acting out within the relationship, behaving irrationally. We may be out of balance, and we might be passive aggressive toward our partners. We may be compelled to behave like that. We may be overly defensive, may be arrogant even, but not really aware of it, or we haven't really got to the reasons as to why. Well, this particular alignment may be hinting as to what could be the cause of it. It's not necessarily the cause, but it might be. The Vulcanus archetype is broadly about estrangement and alienation between mothers and sons, but it's broader than that even. It's about that parental influence over children and the extent to which that has shaped our reality, our perspective and worldview that we then bring into these relationships. Metaphorically, Vulcan and Cancer functioned underwater, which means that that energy is beneath the waking consciousness. And inherently, it's difficult to confront and to identify and isolate this energy and unravel it. Unresolved trauma between a mother and a son has been suppressed in the Vulcan archetype. And that can manifest within a relationship as anger, as vengeance, the drive to be right, to be dominant, and to be powerful. The story, and there's many of them, but this is part of the Vulcan story about the ugly duckling or the black sheep that was cast out of the fold, is a tough and uncompromising and emotionally draining topic. But with that said, if we don't tackle these things in our lives and we're in relationships, be they professional or romantic, these things can blow up and manifest, and that's the sign or the signal, if you like, of this Vulcanus square at this particular point in time. And Mars influence here, they're both fire, Vulcanus fire, Mars fire as well, in a water sign, sensitive Cancer. That's quite a combination. So Mars is like pouring gasoline on this sort of emotional maelstrom, this fire, and it amps up our feelings of inferiority, where mummy issues rooted in unforgiveness and a sense of injustice can manifest and then be projected out and onto our partner or partners.
And so we spoke about a beneficial thing with Saturn, but normally in opposition can be a tricky situation as well. But I feel like by having Pluto on the opposite side of Mars and Vulcanus, it could give us a great time to transform. I love the way that you describe the Plutonic pathway. So how do you see that happening at this time?
Yeah, so let's just build this up and bring it to this last piece of the blog, which is that the Libra is about thinking and communication within the context of our committed personal and professional relationships. So there's the background. And what we have is Saturn bringing us to account and asking us to think about the way we are behaving within those relationships, but the structure also of those relationships. And then the square with Vulcanus and Mars is asking us to consider that if there is dysfunction, conflict, even to the point where a relationship may be breaking down, it gives us a clue as to what might be behind that. But it doesn't stop there. This particular astrological configuration is beautiful, as you say, because it's almost like it's the way that it's layered is, I mean, the intelligence behind the organization and the orchestration of these planetary alignments at this particular new moon is quite profound. And there's a capstone here, and the piece of that is this Vulcanus-Mars conjunction, which is opposite Pluto. And as you mentioned, normally that is a tense relationship, and it can be, but it holds the seeds or the template, if you like, the pathway, we call it the Plutonic pathway, to if you've got to a point within your relationships where you've identified that, hey, I'm acting out, a lot of it's to do with, a dysfunctional relationship with my mother. This is from a male perspective, or from a mother perspective, it might be with the son, and it's really eating away. And you've come to a point where you want to resolve it through communication, through thinking, and through restructuring, if you like, that relationship. Well, the Plutonic pathway provides us with a 3-step process to actually go about moving forward confidently. And we call, we say that the Pluto archetype, or we identify that the Pluto archetype has actually got 3 very distinct steps that when we are trying to resolve, to remediate, to reconcile, to heal trauma, to resolve things in our life, that we first need to transmute negative energies and ideas. And the transmutation process happens through awareness, and awareness happens through thought. And it's the thinking and the communication with self that allows us to get to a place of, I can transmute that negative energy, but the first step of it is awareness. So keep that in mind. Before we can transcend the beliefs, the attitudes, the trauma, the trapped emotions, before we can transcend any of that, we need to have identified that there's an issue, but then we can transcend those. Ultimately, these are thoughts, these are feelings, these are emotions, emotional or thought kind of, they're being locked up, or they're being contorted or distorted. So the key with awareness of unraveling that is the next part is we can transcend that, and we can do that by reframing. And reframing is a very powerful technique that we identify the situation. Step 1, transmute the energy. And then we can transcend it by reframing or rethinking or recalibrating, which is thought, just looking at it a different way, coming up with a different perspective. The story that we're telling ourselves about, say, that dysfunctional relationship with our mother or the mother relationship with the son may in fact just be flat out wrong. It might be biased. It might be time to have a good think about that. So that's how we transcend, and we transform these situations and scenarios in our lives through knowledge and action. So we have to have awareness, we have to have reframing, and then we have to have knowledge and action that is applied to that situation that allows us to move forward in a more confident way.
I'm so happy that we finished with that part, because it kind of just, to me, I see now this whole new moon as a beautiful opportunity to observe, to use the structures in our lives, to then really go inwards to think, where did this belief come from, and then playing with that to transform your life. Beautiful. Thank you. I hope I didn't just take your summary away. How would you like to summarize it?
Even if you did, it's fine. However, just wrapping this up, Libra is about communication and thought, and that is the basis for a sustainable, resilient, committed relationship. Saturn's role here is that he asks us to consider the structure of our relationships. What is implied within those relationships? What roles and responsibilities do we take? Do we fall into? What are the division of duties? Is it time to rewrite contracts? Is it time to recalibrate the way that we relate to one another within these relationships? And Saturn also says that it's a great time to work on our relationships, to master them, to improve them, to tweak them. Libra reminds us also, when we go back to the tarot with the sword of justice, about cause and effects, and that there is a consequence for everything that we do. So Libra says seek balance. And it's a great time, therefore, to reconcile, to dissolve, and to commence new relationships. So all of those aspects are in play. Sometimes relationships run their course. Well, this is a great time to put that dissolution process in play and have it work out really well for both parties. But at the same time, it's also a great time to start. So both things are going on here. Libra, Aries, the whole pathway of, by the time you get to Libra, you have to have started with Aries. And of course, Aries and Libra are opposite to one another. They're 1 and the 7 in the numerology. But Libra, Aries, that is the process of I gives way to we. And finally, we touched on the dysfunction and that may exist within relationships, where we may be acting out, where we may be acting irrationally, where we may be acting unconsciously toward other, where we may be projecting onto the other. The Vulcanus-Mars square provides us with some insight into that it may be, the root of that may be mother-son relationships. And I said before that it isn't specifically the mother-son. It could be that you observed that. You may have been a sibling that saw that and it's rubbed off on you as well. So it's more than just the mother-son, but that's the key to the Vulcanus archetype, and just having a look at that through a positive lens. And finally, that Plutonic pathway is the key to resolving some of the dysfunction that may be rooted in that a fractious, shall we say, a traumatic, a difficult relationship between a mother and a son. The Plutonic pathway gives us 3 keys to resolve that, which is to transmute the negative energies, to transcend the beliefs underlying that by reframing those beliefs, by telling another story, and then finally we can get to transform the situation for our highest good.
And so it is.
And so it is.
Thank you. If we have sparked your interest and you would like to know what your 13 sign natal chart looks like, flick us a message or go to our Buy Me a Coffee page and we can draw your natal chart for a small donation. If you would like to know what the relationship between the sun, moon, and rising sign and some of the others are, and in what position they are, etc., then a 2-hour natal reading is for you. Also get in touch with us. You can find us on Telegram, where we are most active. We are on YouTube, Spotify, a community on Facebook, and always open for your questions and queries. Thank you so much for today, David.
Namaste.
Namaste.